Welcome to another episode of Tanstwocents. I'm your podcast, Tanwilson, and today we're diving into another topic that's critical for success in the GovCon world, choosing the right contract vehicles. And in this episode, entitled Choosing the Right Contract Vehicles, GWACs, BICs, and IDIQs, we'll explore how these vehicles have shaped bid strategies, drive growth, and create opportunities for government contractors everywhere. So, whether you're targeting a government wide acquisition contract or a GWAC, a best in class vehicle or a BIC, or an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract known as an IDIQ contract, knowing where to focus your efforts is really crucial. And joining with us here today is my good friend, colleague, partner in crime is Aaron Telach, the Chief Growth Officer at Quanbear Technology, who is an experienced professional in the GovCon industry on GovCon strategies and contracting vehicles. Aaron, thanks for joining us here today, and introduce yourselves for those few who do not know you to our intellectual listeners, and share us a little bit more about your background.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm genuinely excited to be here. I have been looking forward to this since you started your podcast. This is the place to be. Looking back on figuring out what we were going to talk about, there were so many good options, and excited for today's topic as well. I have been in GovCon now for 28 years. I started as a Defense Department contract specialist and contracting officer, pivoted into industry and started working in program management, line management, and then corporate leadership roles ranging from company corporate operations to business development and growth strategy, proposal management, whatever the need may be. So a lot of different parts of experience in GovCon, large businesses and small alike. I did large business for about 9.5 years, and now I've been doing small business support really for about the last, about 15 years. Also active in AFCEA, the Armed Forces Communication Electronics Association, in particular, the Small Business Center of Excellence that you helped stand up, where we run a Meta-Protege program, helping small business leaders get support on really any kind of mentoring they may need for a variety of GovCon topics.
Yeah, and I love the fact that even though you're a policy wonk, you and I still get along because our sense of humors are just questionable at some point. But you got to have a good sense of humor doing what we do. Otherwise, we would probably be drinking more heavily than what we already do, right?
True story, absolutely. I love the complexity of the business. I think that goes back to my time in the government. I had an amazing boss and mentor, still a dear friend of mine, in Peter Smingler. Peter taught me everything about government contracting. He was looking for someone with a dozen years of telecommunications contracting experience, and he got an intern largely freshly out of college. So once he got over the bitter disappointment of that, he got to work in really kind of showing me the ropes. And that background, combined with a little Defense Acquisition University training, kind of makes me a little bit of a purist in the way that I look at government contracting. Baseline lessons like the FAR will provide. If we're struggling with a procurement, it's probably due to a lack of acumen and not the cumbersomeness of the FAR or the DFARs. It's just in setting an acquisition strategy and executing on it to get those contract vehicles out there, competed and awarded.
Yeah, exactly. So you and I have had some riveting conversations, and it has taken us a little while to finally come up with what are we possibly going to talk about on a podcast? And dwindling down that list of possible topics was very difficult. So at least we have one right now, and I'm assuming this is not going to be the last episode that you'll be on, anyways. But before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of government contracting vehicles, um, what would you say if your GovCon journey were a meal? Because you and I are big foodies. What would it be? And are we talking fast food? Are we talking fine dining, potluck? What kind of comes to mind when you think about GovCon and food?
I'm going to go with Old Country Buffet. There's, too wide a set of options, and most of it's probably best avoided. If in doubt, get the deep fried things. Now, that kind of breadth of background and really the curiosity I think that I've got with how things work has really been a central part uh, of my journey in GovCon. And even though I've been out of government service for 23 years now, every single day someone will bring me something and say, "What does this mean?" And that's where, gosh, it would be probably the fine dining option of, well, you're looking at this and it's done like that, and here's why. But that really just ties back to, again, the way that I was expected to learn and grow in GovCon of, okay, just know what the acronym is, know how to define it, know what it means, know why it's there, and what it's supposed to be for. And I suspect we're going to get into a fair amount of that as we dive into the IDIQs themselves.
Yeah, I guess if I had to equate GovCon to some type of a dining experience, I would probably say Texas Day Brazil or some Brazilian steakhouse. And so it's like you get a lot of what you want. There's always a variety of meats coming around, but then you've got this huge buffet of like cheap items, but don't fill up on the cheap stuff,
I
right?
love that. And yes, you probably wind up overeating until you send up the mercy flag. Please stop now. I've had enough.
Exactly. So, all right. So let's dive into our very expensive fogo de chao, Texas Day Brazil, Chima type of dinner conversation, and let's just get right down to level setting and establishing some type of a foundation understanding of why GWACs, BICs, and IDIQs matter. And I like to start off with the basics. And so for our intellectuals who might not be familiar with this industry, could you explain the key differences between GWACs, BICs, and IDIQs and why
Sure.
they're so important in the GovCon space? Because government and industry uses these terms interchangeably. And from a contractual FAR perspective, they're all very different but operate in a similar way.
They really, really are. So you were kind enough to define the acronyms before, but let me start off with IDIQ in particular. So indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, it means that the government has a scope of something they want to buy, but they don't know exactly how many they want to buy over the next, let's say, 10 years. That's the indefinite delivery. I don't know when I need it. And indefinite quantity. I don't know exactly how many I need. Every IDIQ will have a dollar ceiling and a dollar floor. Most people are familiar with the ceilings, and you may see some enormous numbers out
Mhm.
there. Our friends in the Army are working on a $50 billion IDIQ procurement. Cool. That sounds like a great contract to have. The floor does come up. It's the guaranteed minimum. You'll see that usually a fairly nominal dollar amount, maybe like $2,500 for the contract. Whatever minimum satisfies matters. But from a wonk perspective, it's an interesting thing because the more of the contracts the government makes, the more of the floor they have to have in cash on hand in order to cover that obligation, or they'll be what the contracting folks call anti-deficient. So even if it is $2,500, but I've got 100 awardees, I've got to have that cash on hand over the life of the contract. So all best-in-class vehicles and all GWACs are IDIQs, but not all IDIQs are GWACs or best-in-class vehicles. So let me start at the top. You've got your IDIQs, and then of those, there are a subset that are those government-wide acquisition contracts, or GWACs. The GWACs are a relatively small pool in total number, but a very, very large marketplace for dollars being expended. The three executive agencies with GWAC authority are going to be GSA, and you'll see GSA's GWACs like Alliant, Oasis Plus, STARS for 8As, VETS. Those are GSA's primary vehicles. National Institute of Health has their CIOSP3, and I don't want to talk about CIOSP4 today. They're working on it. But that is also a GWAC, and then NASA with SOUP. Those are government wide acquisition contracts. The idea behind a GWAC is that it's open for all or a broad range of federal agencies to use, and it's kind of a broad marketplace for business. And that gets into the best in class vehicles. That is a subset designation. It doesn't have to necessarily be a GWAC. but most of them are. And this is, by definition, a set of contracts that are, again, open for use across multiple federal agencies, but then have key characteristics that are driven by Office of Management and Budget in terms of the spend on them and their scope, and how those ideas will fit together for being, again, a broad marketplace. Taking all those things together, IDIQs are generally, best viewed as like a hunting license or fishing license. If you win a $50 billion IDIQ, you haven't won $50 billion. What you've won is the right to fish until you and everyone else that won have gotten up to the $50 billion ceiling or run through the term of the contract, that maybe 10-year period, whichever the two comes first. So, very useful vehicles for winning task orders that support any number of government agencies. And getting into why having them kind of becomes important, uh, the government every year spends more and more money on these IDIQ type contracts. It is easy for contracting officers, and it becomes a way to compete requirements with less paperwork and less time needed in order to get to awards. So if the contracting community wants to do it just a little bit faster and easier for them, they will frequently place their requirements out on one of the IDIQ type contracts. Some agencies, Department of Homeland Security component agencies, for example, even have policies saying thou shalt use one
Hmm.
of the GWAC contracts to satisfy requirements. They know that they're getting purchasing power by doing that. They're getting streamlined procurements doing that. And they think that it is smarter than setting up individual contracts competed under System for Award Management, for example. It's just faster and easier for the government to award in that
It is, but they really are the bane of my existence sometimes, right? It
way.
they're and I'm so glad that you made the
I
distinction of the fact
understand.
that the
Um,
the ceiling, like the ceiling level for the contracts is just what it is. It's the ceiling. It's what the contract could be, could be valued at. But I think that there is such a misinformation out there for those who are new to the GovCon um, industry, that it's like, oh, I'm going to win a $50 billion contract and I'm going to get $50 billion worth of work. Well,
yeah,
no, you can compete with you and 1,000 or several hundred of your closest friends. And so a lot of these are multiple awards. I think, especially for like IDIQs, there are single award IDIQs. And so there are, those distinctions. But for the most part, if you're talking about a BIC or a GWAC, you are competing with other people. So there's still one more layer of competition. And so you really do need to make sure that you understand those challenges still after you win. Um,
yeah. Two more acronyms because we love our acronyms that are a little bit newer on the scene: multiple award task order contract, single award task order contract, MATOCs and SATOCs. It does make it a little bit clearer what kind of IDIQ you're talking about. Those single award task order contracts can be exceptionally lucrative. My alma
mhm.
mater, the Defense Information Systems Agency, runs the Defense Department's voice, video, and imagery networks, including NIPRNet, SIPRNet, Defense Switch Network, Defense Video Network, all off of a single award task order contract our friends at Leidos have held now for coming on about the last 10 years. And that contract produces roughly $500 million a year of revenue, single award. So you get into run rate. And if we're looking at an IDIQ, one of the first questions I want to ask is anybody actually using this thing? And
Yeah.
if so, how much? You'll see some really big numbers. NIH, that I mentioned earlier with their CISP3 contract, is moving, I think, $6-7 billion a year of orders coming off their contracts. That's great. NASA SOUP is working on procuring SOUP 6 right now. Their SOUP 5 moves multiple billions of dollars. GSAs, GWACs typically will as well. And so you get a sense of just how, when I said earlier, broad marketplace, that's the kind of annual spend that's going to the contract holders that they're competing for and winning. But it's a sign that the marketplace is widely, widely used. And that's going to drive that question that you got after, like, why do I need these things? If there's that kind of spending going on, I've got to be there. If I
Yeah,
want to do work with the U.S. Navy doing IT, almost all that spend comes on their seaport contract. I better have that IDIQ awarded to me if I want to be competitive as a prime contractor supporting the Navy.
exactly. But it's just the first stepping stone, right? So we're gonna unpack this a little bit more here as we go through our discussion.